The DUNU DK-3001 didn't impress me on my first listen. It's not particularly bassy like the JVC FW01, it doesn't give me a mesmerizing vocal quality, it doesn't have a dazzling treble like my unique Melody Maverick, but at the same time, I didn't hate it. So seeing how popular DUNU is in the realm of chi-fi, or Chinese hi-fi, I thought it's still a good idea to pick up a pair just to see why people like DUNU so much. Welcome to Earphoneus Fanaticus, aka the Earphone Freak. At this video, we'll take a detailed look at the DUNU DK-3001. So let's start with the packaging. On the cover, it looks just like any other earphone boxes. You have the company logo, an image of the earphone, the model, the drivers, some accessories maybe, and of course a fancy high-res audio badge. And as we all know, this little badge instantly makes your audio gears like, 10 times better. Flip the box over and you'll see more product information, which we'll talk about when we actually check out the earphone itself. I do want to point out some technical specs now so you know what to expect out of this earphone. The DK-3001, or the 3K1 as I'll call it from now on, features 4 drivers on each side, 3 of which are now balanced armature drivers that are responsible for mids and highs, as well as a huge 13mm dynamic driver which is responsible for the bass. Well, that's what I assume anyway. It seems nobody actually has any idea how these drivers are configured. Frequency response is reported to range from a very low 5Hz to an extremely high 40 kHz, which is why the 3K1 is high-res certified. Sensitivity is at a frightening level of 110 decibels, and together with a measly 13 ohms impedance, you can expect this earphone to be extremely loud. Removing the packaging paper reveals a very nice looking black box. I like the texture on it. Open it up and you should see your earphone on the top and a black carrying case. Let's look at the case. It's a relatively plain looking case, but I actually think this case is awesome. It's a hard case, so you don't have to worry about squishing your earphones when you put this whole thing into your bag. It's quite roomy inside, so you can put most earphones into it no problem. Well, that's unless your earphone is as big as the Maverick I have here. From factory, there should be a crap ton of stuff inside the case, and they are all ear tips. Not your generic tips though. Well, okay, no, you still have 2 bags of generic tips, but you also get 3 sets of spin fit in small, medium and large, and 1 set of Comply T500 memory foam tips. Hey, remember I said there are only ear tips in the back case? I lied. There's also an airline converter, a 1/4 inch converter, and a shirt clip for the cable. But that is not the end for the accessories. If you take out this layer of black cover, that's not an accessory. And you take out this piece of black paper, that's also not an accessory. But underneath, you'll find a balance cable that terminates with a 2.5mm jack. So as you can see, DUNU is not skimping on the accessories here at all, and I absolutely appreciate that because that makes the whole package more of a sincere product. Sure, most of them will end up being unused, such as the ear tips, but at least if I wanna, I have the choice to use them. And besides, I can share them with my other earphones for tuning and other purposes. Alright, let's finally check out the DUNU DK-3K1. The housing is made of a sturdy, high-quality metal, and it feels great on hand. It does feel a little heftier than your usual earphones with plastic housing, but you won't notice it when you listen to them. What you will notice though are these sharp edges on the inner side, and they hurt so bad even after a short listen. So if you have the chance, definitely try them on first to see if the sharp edges bother you. They certainly bother me, so I'm forced to insert them less deeply into my ear canals than I would have liked, and sound isolation definitely takes a toll as a result. The sound tube is quite big, but nowhere near the size of the sound tube on the Maverick, so getting ear tips on it is still very easy to do, no loosening required. The cable is detachable, and it uses MMCX connection. I do find the connection on this to be a lot stiffer than normal MMCX connections though, and it is quite difficult to remove. So if you're worried about the durability of MMCX, you shouldn't be with this earphone. The cable is well made, and it is quite soft, perfect for traveling. In fact, I would say the softness of this cable is like EX1000 level, and the cable on the EX1000 is very good indeed, so think of this as a high praise. Just like the EX1000, it terminates with a right-angled 3.5mm audio jack. It is small, it is stress-relieved, it is right-angled, no complaints there. But just like the EX1000 cable, the e-guide is way too long. They could have honestly shortened it by half, and it would still be too long. Another thing that bothers me is that this part doesn't appear to be properly stress relieved. I mean, this wouldn't be a big problem if the e-guide isn't so long. I like what they did with the splitter. It feels metallic, it is stress relieved, and the choker can be fitted back to the splitter thanks to its shape. Very cool design. Finally, there's a stretchable piece of rubber that can be used to pack the cable. I never find it useful because for the most part I wrap the cable around my DPX1 when I am done listening to music, but having it dangling on the cable doesn't really bother me. Alright, let's finally talk about the most important thing about an earphone: sound quality. Let's start with sound signature. I'm usually able to identify an earphone as bright or dark or neutral, warm, but I have a really hard time finding the right word to describe the 3K1. Is it bright? Not really, but I guess it's bright enough. Is it dark? The bass is quite deep and powerful indeed, so dark I guess. Is it neutral? Well, I don't really find any part of the frequency response to stand out, so I guess that also makes it neutral. I guess the best words I have to describe the sound signature are mixed feelings and unimpressive on first listen. Let me elaborate more. Let's start from the low frequency. I'm happy to say that the dynamic driver is doing an amazing job here, because it can easily reach down to 10Hz without cranking up the volume, but admittedly 20Hz is a lot more audible to me. From there to around 100Hz there's a steady increase in volume, but from 100Hz to 200Hz it seems to remain equally loud. Overall, I would say the 3K1 has a relatively loud bass that will always add thickness to anything you listen to. If you're more used to a neutral or area sounding earphone like the OnQ E900M or the Unique Melody Maverick, or basically anything that's lighter on bass, you'll most certainly find the bass to be just a tad bit suffocating. But some people do prefer big bass, and the 3K1 does make it easier to hear the bass when you're outside, so this one is up to personal preference. Now, despite the relatively prominent bass, I'm happy to say that there is little to no rattling, which is honestly quite surprising for IEMs. So that's another testament to how good the dynamic driver here is, or how DUNU has paid special attention to how to mount this driver. But like I say, I do think the bass takes a bit away from the airiness and analytical quality you might expect from higher-end earphones, so personally I would love for DUNU to tune it down just a little bit. Make the bass a supplement to music, something to fulfill the whole experience, but don't overdo it so it becomes the main stage. Moving on to the mid-frequencies, this is where most meaningful musical elements like the melody, male and female vocals land in. So as you can imagine, good mids alone can easily sway someone from liking the earphone to absolutely loving it. This part is a bit of a mixed bag for me. I love the 3K1's presentation of male vocals. They tend to sound quite masculine and meaty, so if you're the type to like the male voice, the 3K1 should treat you well. This characteristic applies to cello as well. When playing short cello pieces, the 3K1 is able to recreate the reverberation that just sounds so nice coming from a cello. The closest earphone I can relate this to is the Shure SE846, except I think the 3K1 sounds even better in this regard, because it is not as muffled. Now, while the 3K1 is quite strong in male vocal, it just doesn't wow me with female vocals. I usually look for smooth upper mids in earphones, which is around the range of 1 to 2 kHz, because this can make the whole sound signature a bit smoother sounding as well. This can also remove the harshness or raw feeling in vocals. The 3K1 doesn't take that approach though, and instead it opts to have a slightly forward upper mid-range. Now, even though this doesn't mean the 3K1 is harsh sounding with female vocals, sometimes it would struggle with songs where the vocals are specially tuned to have a bit of an airy echo. Those just don't sound right with the 3K1 at all. This is actually quite similar to the graininess of the EX1000, which I've already done a comprehensive review for, but the 3K1 sounds a slightly bit worse here. But even when there's no special effect, female voices still don't impress me, so overall I guess the mids on the 3K1 is just alright. Let's move on to the higher frequencies. Frequency response wise from high to low, by ears I think it first become easily audible at 16 kHz. Then from 15 kHz to 14 kHz there is a major dip. Then from 13 kHz it gradually rises to a small peak at 12 kHz. And finally from 8 to 9 kHz is the sharpest peak. As complicated as that might have sounded, I have to say the 3K1 is just so-so in this department. It's your typical treble quality that won't dazzle you in any way. Cymbals don't sound exactly like cymbals, and sometimes high-frequency sounds are even covered by other musical elements. So no, if you want crispy treble, look elsewhere. The OnQ E900M I reviewed a while back will give you that for a lower price. Let's talk about the soundstage. Now, as crazy as it might seem, I do think good IEMs should possess not only a wide soundstage, but they should also have a certain height to it. This is what I call vertical soundstage. The horizontal soundstage of the 3K1 is just average, and this is because the drivers are positioned so closely to our ear canal. To achieve wide soundstage, there must be a certain distance between the driver and our ear canal, and the EX1000 is a great example here. There's also no vertical soundstage to speak of for the 3K1, so you can kiss vertical layering goodbye. Normally, I would attribute this to the lack of the individual boards for different drivers in the sound chip, but honestly, I have no easy way to tell whether that's the case for this earphone. If somebody has an internal diagram, maybe a blown-up view, that would be great. Anyway, the average horizontal soundstage and virtually non-existent vertical soundstage results in different sounds being mixed together, so it's quite difficult for me to pick out individual elements when listening to musically complex soundtracks. This leads to an overall feeling of low clarity. The relatively prominent bass doesn't help with this either. This is quite a letdown, to be honest, because at this price range you would expect a relatively hi-fi sound, and you can't really achieve that if the soundstage is so average and you have the bass constantly thickening everything you hear. Let's touch on dynamic range real quick. I don't have machines for accurate measurements, but by ear, in my relatively quiet room I can reach around 72 decibels, which is quite good, but not as good as the EX1000 at 78 decibels. With larger dynamic range, you should be able to identify fainter sounds at a relatively high volume. Again, don't quote me on this. Finally, I know most people who watch this kind of videos have third-party ear tips, so here I'm going to discuss ear tip compatibility. I have Comply, Spiral Dots and SpinFit, but before talking about those, I do want to touch on the silicone tips that came with the 3K1. There are two flavors. You have the white tips, which should be on the 3K1 by default, and the grey tips. They're actually a little bit different. The white tips have a shorter central core than the grey tips, so when you put them on the 3K1 they will extend a bit less than the grey ones, but they do have the same size for the opening. Material-wise, they're pretty much identical, but the white ones are a little bit softer. I don't really know how to explain this, but I do think the grey ones give a slightly cleaner and more open sound compared to the white ones, and the treble is a tiny bit more prominent. The white ones, on the other hand, sound a little bit more offensive because the bass is punchier. It might just be a placebo, but I do think the difference is quite obvious. Next up, we have the Comply tips. It extends even more than the grey tips. The opening is quite a bit bigger as well. Sound-wise, I think they're good with the 3K1, but it's just that with the Comply, I feel like clarity is a tiny bit worse, but they do have the benefit of providing better sound isolation. Because of my bad experience with Comply in the past, including poor durability, poor compression in the long run, as well as in general being too big and uncomfortable for my ears, the Comply will never be my personal favorite. The next third-party tips I tried was the JVC Spiral Dots. They don't extend as much as the default white tips, but the opening is the biggest, even compared to the Comply. I think the Spiral Dots is a very good match with the 3K1. It alleviates some of the sound suffocation I feel with the white tips thanks to its wide opening, and it makes the sound sweeter and easier on the ears. In terms of vertical soundstage, the Spiral Dots will be your best choice, but since the 3K1 has no business in vertical layering anyway, having a taller sound is really not that big of a deal with this earphone. But overall, I think the Spiral Dots pair really well with the 3K1, so if you have this earphone, definitely give the Spiral Dots a shot. The last one I tried was the very popular SpinFit. It extends more than the great stock tips, but the opening is the smallest out of all the tips I tried. While the small opening does decrease the height of the sound, it accentuates treble just a bit more while still keeping the bass in check, unlike the snobbiness of the white stock tips. I think it sounds quite similar to the grey tips when fitted onto the 3K1. Even though it's not the best combo sound quality wise, I actually have the SpinFit on the 3K1 for a longer time than any other ear tips, and the reason is because the SpinFit allows me to insert the earphone less deeply into my ear canal, so I can listen to this earphone without the sharp edge jugging at my ears all the time. Sure, the grey stock tips extend just as deeply, but they aren't as soft and comfortable. So, to summarize, while I think the JVC Spiral Dots provides the best sound, in order to cater to comfort, I had to sacrifice sound quality a bit by going with the SpinFit. So, I've said all things about this earphone already, and from what you have heard just now, I'm sure you can get the impression that I'm actually a bit disappointed with this earphone. It is by no means a bad package as a whole. I love the sheer number of accessories DUNU has packed along with this earphone, especially the hard plastic case that is roomy enough for most earphones and it is easy to open with one hand. It is so simple yet functional that I think every earphone company should include this kind of case for their products. I also like how they have included a balance cable so that those with high-end sources can take advantage of the 2.5mm balance output and get potentially better sound quality. But what surprised me the most is the inclusion of spin fits and comply. I mean, comply is quite common to see shipped with earphones these days. They came with my UE900 which was released back in 2012, but comply and spin fit? Absolute bonkers! And besides, even if you're not a fan of exotic third-party tips, you still get those stock white and grey tips, so you can fine-tune the sound quality all you want. DUNU is really the first company I've seen to provide so many accessories, both stock and third-party. And like what I've said earlier, if you want a product to feel like something of sincerity, you can never go wrong with packing a crap ton of free goodies. It's only human to like free goodies, after all. And look at the earphone itself. It's so small yet solidly built. It's got this sexy low shine black finish, and the cable design is close to ideal minus some minor complaints. I mean, it's just staggering how much DUNU got right. Unfortunately, the warm and fuzzy feeling all disappeared the moment I put the earphone on and listened to my test album. The sharp edge is noticeable at first and grows increasingly painful as time goes on, to the point where I have to take them out to stop the suffering. Even if I put up with the discomfort, the sound quality I'm getting is simply not up to snuff for the price. I think the bass is really where the 3K1 shines. It is deep and punchy with good extension, though at times I think it's a bit too punchy for my taste. But at least from the various tests I did, I know the 13mm dynamic driver they use is high quality. Male vocals and cello are fantastic with the 3K1 as well, so no complaints there. But moving on from the bass, the 3K1 just kind of drops the ball for me. Female vocals are meh, and so is the treble. It even sounded a bit too offensive and annoying at times, but hey, those things I mentioned are only related to sound signature. You can always find anyone to like any sound signature. And quite frankly, the bass on this alone should be enough to sway most people towards favoring the sound. But really, the biggest complaints I have with the sound quality stems from soundstage and layering, and you can trace them all back to the size of the earphone itself. They're packing 4 drivers into this tiny housing, and one of them is 13mm big. 13 freaking millimeters! And yes, they don't give them enough space to breathe. And remember, the focus here is not 4 drivers. I have a 5-driver earphone and it doesn't suffer from suffocation and poor vertical layering. It is my unique Melody Maverick I have flashed on this channel time and again. I'm not gonna say much about the Maverick because it is way too expensive for a pair of earphone, but at least look at the size of it. With this huge amount of space, you can really position the drivers in such a way that the sounds they each generate don't mix with one another, allowing you to pick out individual musical elements clearly if you want. That's not something the 3K1 can boast about. To me, this is such a waste of an opportunity. I mean, if you're going to use multi-driver design, you might as well play with driver positioning a bit, so you can at least get some vertical layering that cannot be achieved using single driver design. Imagine the bass firing at the bottom, vocals and melody in the middle layer, and cymbals at the top. That would be such a cool effect, but most popular consumer level brands aren't doing it. Of course, this is not a complaint started only towards this earphone. This is something I want to get off my chest for a long time because most earphones on the market still use small housing while trying to cramp as many drivers as possible. So, if I was to make a wish list of improvements I would like to see for the 3K1 Mark II, if DUNU ever decides to do that, I would really want to see a bigger casing to house the 4 drivers, because that way you can allow more space for sound to travel around, and you can position drivers farther away, especially the huge 13mm dynamic driver to increase horizontal and vertical soundstage. I feel like that driver is just kind of choking inside that tiny casing they're using now. But of course, make the casing less edgy. So to wrap this review up, I just want to say that even though I didn't particularly enjoy this earphone, I actually have no idea how much people care about things like horizontal or vertical layering. Now, I'm sure you guys who are actually taking the time to watch this in-depth review should have some idea of what I'm talking about, but you would be surprised by how little people look for in sound quality. If it doesn't sound wrong, it's already good enough for them. And quite frankly, it took my unhealthy amount of passion for earphones, as well as my latent urge to splurge big money for the best of the best, to genuinely appreciate every detail that contributes to sound quality, because without those things, I would have never spent so much money on the Maverick, and I would never know what vertical layer is, or even know that vertical layering is a thing with earphones. And going back to what I said about people not complaining much about sound quality as long as it sounds good enough, I really don't think the 3K1 is particularly bad with its sound signature. It's generally quite fixed sounding, female vocals sometimes sound unnatural, and the treble doesn't shimmer and sparkle like what I would have liked. But if you put all these things together, the 3K1 still doesn't sound that bad at all. And don't forget that as a reviewer, I am largely swayed by my own preference, but my preference is not a be-all end-all preference at all, and I don't claim to have the best taste in this kind of thing. It's just that this earphone didn't click with me. At the price of 52,265 yen, or 3,740 Hong Kong dollars, or 475 US dollars at the time I paid for this earphone, I personally think there are better choices out there in terms of sound quality or even just sound signature. But with this really well thought out package as a whole, as well as a generally acceptable sound quality, I think the 3K1 can still be recommended to a certain extent. If you have the chance, definitely try this pair on to see whether you nitpick as much as I do with earphones. Maybe you will be impressed by the sturdy and compact metal casing. Maybe you will be impressed by the simple and elegant cable. Maybe you will be impressed by how sturdy the MMCX connection is despite what you have heard in the past. So, that's it for this review. What do you guys think about this earphone? If you own it or have tried it before, leave your thoughts in the comment section below. If you have any question regarding this earphone, of course you can leave that in the comments too. Don't forget to drop a like and subscribe for more earphone reviews and unboxing in the future. This is Earphoneus Fanaticus, and I will see you in the next video.